By the time police came for Mackenzie Shirilla, the story had already changed. It was no longer being treated as only a terrible early morning crash in Strongsville, Ohio. It was no longer just a case of a car, a quiet road, and three young people who never expected that ride to end in tragedy. Two young men were gone. One young woman had survived, and investigators were no longer asking only how the car reached that building. In the arrest footage, Mackenzie appears young, emotional, and still physically affected by what had happened months earlier. The detective, identified in the original transcript as Detective Jesu, tells her she is being arrested in connections with the crash investigation. Her parents are nearby, upset and protective, insisting that she should not answer questions without legal counsel. To Steve and Natalie Shirilla, Mackenzie was their daughter, a teenager who had survived a devastating crash, someone they believed was injured, confused, and wrongly accused. But to prosecutors, Mackenzie had become the person responsible for the deaths of two people who trusted her. Those two people were Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Dominic was not a stranger in the car. He was Mackenzie's boyfriend, someone she had dated for years, someone connected to her daily life, her family, her future, and the version of young love her parents would later describe. Davion was not part of that romantic relationship. He was a friend, a young man riding with people he knew, never expecting that his name would become tied forever to a case about relationship conflict, intent, and betrayal. Content warning: this case involves the deaths of two young people, relationship conflict, and a criminal trial. The details will be handled respectfully and without graphic description. Welcome to Behind Unreal Love Crimes. If you're new here, subscribe for victim-centered true crime stories where we follow the relationship, the evidence, and the courtroom outcome. And if you're returning, thank you for your likes, comments, and shares. They help keep these cases from being forgotten. Because this case is not just about a crash. It is about what investigators found after the crash. It is about what witnesses said about the relationship before the crash. It is about what the vehicle data showed in the final seconds. And it is about the court's central question: was this a tragic accident, or did the evidence prove something intentional? Mackenzie Shirilla would later say she did not remember what happened that morning. Her parents would continue to say she was innocent. But a judge in Ohio heard the evidence and reached a very different conclusion. To understand how the case got there, we have to begin where the public debate intensified. After Mackenzie was already convicted, already in prison, and still insisting that what happened was not intentional. After renewed documentary attention around the case, Mackenzie spoke publicly from prison. Her parents also spoke out. Steve Shirilla and Natalie Shirilla continued to defend their daughter, saying they believed the crash was accidental and that the court had gotten it wrong. But for the families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan, the focus was not only on Mackenzie's pain. It was on the two young men who never came home. That public divide is part of why this case still attracts attention. One side points to Mackenzie's age, injuries, claimed memory loss, and family support. The other side points to the relationship history, the route, the speed, the lack of braking, the vehicle data, and the court's finding that her actions were purposeful. So here are the basic facts. On July 31, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla was 17 years old. She was driving a Toyota Camry in Strongsville, Ohio. Inside the car were Dominic Russo, her boyfriend, and Davion Flanagan, a friend. The crash happened near Progress Drive and Alameda Drive, at the Plidco building. Prosecutors said Mackenzie drove through the area, made a controlled turn, accelerated to about 100 miles per hour, and struck the building. Dominic and Davion did not survive. Mackenzie survived with serious injuries. At first, it could have looked like a devastating crash. But investigators later gathered evidence that changed the direction of the case entirely. And before we go deeper into the evidence, we need to talk about the two young men at the center of the loss. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He was Mackenzie's boyfriend. Their relationship had lasted for years, and court records described that Mackenzie had moved into one of the homes, owned by Dominic's family around late 2021 or early 2022. To some people around them, Mackenzie and Dominic looked like a serious young couple. the kind of relationship people describe as intense, close, and full of future plans. Mackenzie's parents publicly framed it that way. They described Dominic as the love of Mackenzie's life and suggested that if the crash had not happened, the relationship might have continued into adulthood. But the court would hear another version. Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, testified that in the months before the crash, the relationship had become strained. The court heard about arguments, breakups, threats, and possessiveness. Dominic's brother, Angelo Russo, also became part of the relationship timeline because he testified about Dominic, considering whether the relationship should end. That is the first major tension in this case. A relationship can look one way from the outside and feel very different inside it. Posts can show closeness, family memories can hold on to affection, friends can remember good moments. But prosecutors argued that beneath the surface, Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship had become unstable, and that instability mattered because it helped explain motive and intent. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. He was not the boyfriend. He was not the person prosecutors described as the center of the romantic conflict. He was a friend and passenger, socially connected to the group. Tyler Croy, one of Davion's friends, would later provide location-related information to police that helped investigators understand the group's movements during the final hours before the crash. Davion's place in the story matters. Too often in this case, the public conversation focuses on Mackenzie, her parents, and the debate over whether she meant to do it. Dominic gets attention because he was her boyfriend, but Davion must not be reduced to the other person in the car. He was a young man with his own life, his own family, his own friends, and his own future. Whatever was happening between Mackenzie and Dominic, Davion was also there. He trusted the people he was with. He had no reason to believe that ride would become the final chapter of his life. That is what makes this case especially painful within the relationship-homicide space. The relationship may have been central to the state's theory, but the harm reached beyond the couple. The court had to consider two very different pictures of Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship. The first picture was the one Mackenzie's family emphasized: young love, a long relationship, a couple who had history, a bond that, from their point of view, made intentional harm unthinkable. Defense witnesses also supported parts of that view. Allison Grolleau, who owned an organic produce market in Strongsville, testified that she had seen Mackenzie and Dominic together and thought they appeared loving. Candace Shipley, Mackenzie's aunt, also testified for the defense and said she had seen the couple close to the time of the crash without noticing obvious conflict. But prosecutors built the second picture. That picture was not about smiling photos or family hopes. It was about what witnesses said was happening when the relationship was strained. Christine Russo described the relationship becoming more difficult in the 6 months before the crash. Angelo Russo described Dominic questioning whether the relationship should continue. Christopher Martin, a friend of Dominic's family, testified about a July 2022 highway-related incident involving Mackenzie and Dominic. That incident became important because prosecutors argued that the idea of using a car during relationship conflict had not appeared out of nowhere. They wanted the court to see the crash not as an isolated moment, but as the final point in a pattern. This is where the relationship-homicide angle becomes essential. In cases like this, the relationship is not just background. It can become evidence of motive. It can show escalation. It can explain why investigators look beyond the surface of a death scene, but it must be handled carefully. The script cannot simply say a relationship was toxic and move on. It has to ask, who saw warning signs? Who did not? What did witnesses testify to? What did the defense dispute? And how did the court use that information? The answer in this case is that the relationship evidence became one layer of a larger case. Not the only layer. The forensic evidence would matter just as much. But before the crash itself, there were key moments investigators and prosecutors later focused on. One was the July 17 highway-related incident. According to court records, Christopher Martin testified that Dominic contacted his mother, Christine Russo, while upset. Martin went to help, and the situation became part of the prosecution's relationship timeline. Another was July 28. Detective Zaki Hazo testified about GPS data placing Mackenzie's phone in the Progress Drive and Alameda Drive area days before the crash. He also acknowledged an important limitation. Phone location data can give a general area, but it is not always exact. That distinction matters. For the state, the location data suggested familiarity with the area. For the defense, the limits of that data were important because general location is not the same as pinpoint proof, but prosecutors did not need one piece of evidence to carry the entire case. They built the case through accumulation. The relationship history, the location data, the route, the surveillance video, the speed, the event data recorder, the lack of braking, the mechanical inspection, the medical testimony. Each piece gave the court another angle on the same question. Was this an accident, or was this intentional? The final night began in a way that did not immediately announce danger. On July 30, 2022, Kelly Vraja hosted a graduation party. Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davion attended for a short time. Later, they were at a gathering connected to Paul Burlinghouse on Brushwood Lane. Burlinghouse testified that the gathering seemed calm. He did not describe seeing Mackenzie and Dominic fighting there. That is important, because it gives the defense side some weight. Not every witness saw conflict in the final hours. Not every person in the room believed something was wrong. And that is often the reality in relationship cases. A relationship can be strained without every public moment looking strained. A couple can argue one day and seem affectionate the next. People outside the relationship may see only fragments. By early morning on July 31, the group began to move. Tyler Croy provided Life 360 information connected to Davion's phone. That data helped show Davion's movement from the Brushwood Lane home around 5:30 a.m. Mackenzie was behind the wheel. Dominic and Davion were passengers. The Toyota Camry moved through Strongsville in the early morning, when the streets were quiet. Detective Zaki Hazo later obtained surveillance video from city-owned cameras. The video showed the Camry approaching Progress Drive and making a controlled turn. That detail became one of the most important parts of the case. Prosecutors argued the car was not already out of control when it entered Progress Drive. It was being driven in a controlled way before it accelerated. Then came the speed. Crash reconstruction evidence placed the vehicle near 97 to 100 miles per hour before it left the roadway and struck the Plidco building. Elliot Rawson, from the Ohio State Highway Patrol Crash Reconstruction Unit, testified about speed and time distance analysis, but the strongest forensic evidence came from inside the car. Adam McQuaid, a Brooklyn police sergeant and event data recorder expert, examined the vehicle's data. The event data recorder is often described as a black box. It captures key information from the final seconds before a crash. According to the court record, the data showed that the accelerator was fully pressed in the seconds before impact. It also showed that the service brake was not applied. For prosecutors, that was critical. They argued this was not a brief mistake, not a typical loss of control, not a driver panicking and trying to stop. They argued the data showed acceleration without braking and that the car's movement matched intentional driving. Before we go further into the forensic section, subscribe if you want fact-driven true crime breakdowns that focus on evidence, not rumors. On Behind Unreal Love Crimes, we look at the relationship, the warning signs, the investigation, and the courtroom outcome. Because the facts matter. The defense did not accept the prosecution's interpretation. Mackenzie claimed she did not remember the crash. Her side raised the possibility of a medical episode. Natalie Shirilla testified about Mackenzie having POTS, a condition that can involve dizziness or fainting. Dr. Esther Tseng, a Metro Health trauma surgeon, testified about Mackenzie's hospital examination and what was documented medically after the crash, but the prosecution argued that the evidence did not support a sudden medical event as the cause. Michelle Ruminski, an Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles investigator, testified about Mackenzie's driver's license applications and medical condition attestations. Then there was the mechanical inspection. Mark Sargent, a forensic mechanical expert, inspected the Toyota Camry. He found no pre-crash mechanical or electrical failure that would explain a loss of accelerator control, braking, or steering. He also concluded the brakes appeared functional. That finding mattered because it removed another possible explanation. If the car had failed, that would change the case. If the brakes had failed, that would change the case. If the accelerator had malfunctioned, that would change the case. But the mechanical findings did not support that. Dr. Joseph Philo, the chief deputy medical examiner in Cuyahoga County, also became important. The deaths were initially classified as accidental. After additional investigative materials were reviewed, the manner of death was changed to homicide. That change did not convict Mackenzie by itself. A medical examiner's classification is not the same as a judge's verdict, but it showed how the official understanding of the case shifted once. Investigators looked beyond the crash scene. Police also collected evidence from the scene and vehicle. Michael Galassi, a Strongsville police patrol officer, responded to the crash area. Brent Robinson, another Strongsville patrol officer, testified about the road conditions and route. Brett Stanislaw, a firefighter and paramedic captain, assessed Mackenzie after the crash. Stephen Vanek, a Strongsville detective, assisted with the crash investigation, scene documentation, surveillance collection, and evidence recovery. This is what turned the case from tragedy into prosecution. The relationship history gave context. The final hour's timeline placed everyone together. The surveillance video showed the route. The event data recorder showed acceleration and no braking. The mechanical inspection found no defect explaining the crash. The medical testimony did not persuade the court that a sudden medical event explained it. Together, prosecutors argued the evidence showed intent. After the crash, Mackenzie's public behavior became another point of dispute. She was injured. She claimed memory loss. Her family described her as grieving, but prosecutors argued that some of her post-crash behavior raised questions. The original transcript discusses modeling agency communication connected to a name transcribed as Vitali. It also mentions an unnamed classmate who shared text message information with investigators about photos from Dominic's room. The transcript also discusses Mackenzie attending a concert after the crash, something prosecutors framed as part of their argument about lack of remorse. Natalie Shirilla viewed it differently. At sentencing, she described Mackenzie as devastated. She said, Mackenzie wore Dominic's clothes, listened to his music, kept reminders of him close, and struggled deeply after the crash. She also defended the concert outing as something meant to give Mackenzie a brief moment away from grief, not proof that she did not care. This part of the case needs caution. Grief does not always look one way. Some people isolate. Some people try to resume normal routines. Some people act in ways that outsiders do not understand. So the point is not that one concert or one message proves intent. The point is that prosecutors used her behavior after the crash as part of a broader courtroom narrative. Her family saw grief. The state saw signs that did not fit the image of a devastated survivor. The judge had to weigh all of it. In November 2022, authorities arrested Mackenzie. The police station footage captured a family in disbelief. Steve and Natalie Shirilla were angry about the way the arrest happened and protective of Mackenzie's legal rights. They repeatedly emphasized that she should not speak to police without a lawyer. That reaction is understandable from a parent's point of view. Their daughter was being taken into custody. She had survived serious injuries. They believed she was innocent. But from the state's point of view, the investigation had moved far beyond a simple crash report. Because Mackenzie was 17 at the time of the crash, the case began in juvenile court. The juvenile court did not find probable cause on aggravated murder, but it did find probable cause on other charges and transferred the case to adult court. From there, a Cuyahoga County grand jury returned a 12-count indictment. The charges included 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Mackenzie waived her right to a jury trial. That meant there would be no jury deciding her guilt or innocence. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo would hear the evidence and decide the case in a bench trial. In that courtroom, the legal question was not whether the crash happened. It was not whether Dominic and Davion were gone. It was not whether Mackenzie had been driving. The question was intent. Could prosecutors prove that Mackenzie meant to cause harm? The prosecution built the case in layers. The first layer was the relationship. Christine Russo, Angelo Russo, Christopher Martin, and other evidence helped prosecutors argue that the relationship was not simply loving and stable. They argued it had conflict, breakups, threats, and escalation. The second layer was the timeline. Kelly Vraja, Paul Burlinghouse, and Tyler Croy helped establish where Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davion had been before the crash, and how they moved toward the early morning drive. The third layer was the investigation. Michael Galassi, Brent Robinson, Brett Stanislaw, Stephen Vanek, and Detective Zaki Hazo helped explain what responders and investigators found, what evidence was collected, and how suspicion grew. The fourth layer was the forensic evidence. Adam McQuaid explained the event data recorder. Elliot Rawson explained reconstruction and speed. Mark Sargent addressed the condition of the vehicle. Dr. Esther Tseng addressed medical findings from the hospital side. Dr. Joseph Philo addressed the medical examiner's amended ruling. Michelle Ruminski addressed license and medical condition documentation. The defense strategy was to challenge intent. Mackenzie did not testify. Her defense argued that the state had not proven what was in her mind. They pointed to her claimed memory loss, possible medical explanations, loving moments in the relationship, and the fact that some witnesses did not see conflict in the final hours. That defense mattered, because a terrible outcome alone does not automatically prove murder. Prosecutors had to show more. They had to show that the crash was not just fast, not just reckless, not just tragic, but purposeful. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo found Mackenzie Shirilla guilty. The court concluded that the evidence showed intentional conduct. The judge relied on the relationship evidence, the route, the acceleration, the lack of braking, the vehicle data, and the broader context of the case. Mackenzie was found guilty on all 12 counts. Sentencing came on August 21, 2023. That hearing showed the emotional weight of the case. Mackenzie spoke and continued to say that she did not do it on purpose. Natalie Shirilla defended her daughter and focused on Mackenzie's grief. She described what she believed Mackenzie had gone through after losing Dominic, but the judge redirected attention to the two young men who were gone. Dominic Russo's family had lost a son, brother, and loved one. Davion Flanagan's family had lost a young man who was not part of the romantic conflict, but was still caught in its outcome. The judge made clear that the courtroom could not focus only on Mackenzie's pain. While two families were living with permanent loss, Mackenzie was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life on the murder counts. Her driver's license was suspended for life. The drug-related counts received shorter sentences with credit for time served. The public debate did not end there. After renewed documentary attention, Steve Shirilla, Mackenzie's father, became part of the aftermath. He was identified as a teacher at Mary Queen of Peace School. After the documentary renewed public discussion around the case, he was reportedly placed on administrative leave during a school review. He continued to say he believed his daughter was innocent. This part of the story is not the center of the case, but it shows how divided people remained after sentencing. Mackenzie's family rejected the court's conclusion. The prosecution and victims' families stood by the verdict, and the legal fight continued. Mackenzie's direct appeal was decided in 2024. The 8th District Court of Appeals affirmed her convictions. The appellate record lists prosecutors including Michael C. O'Malley, Anthony T. Miranda, Tim Troop, and Allison McGrath. Eric C. Nemetsek is listed in the appellate record for Mackenzie. The appellate panel included Eileen A. Gallagher, Emanuela D. Groves, and Frank Daniel Celebrez III. Then came a separate post-conviction fight. On October 24, 2024, Mackenzie filed a petition for post-conviction relief. That is different from a direct appeal. A direct appeal reviews what happened in the trial record. A post-conviction petition can raise certain claims outside the trial record, including issues connected to evidence or counsel. The trial court dismissed the petition as untimely, finding it had been filed 1 day past the 365-day deadline. In March 2026, the 8th District Court of Appeals affirmed that dismissal. Judge Anita Laster-Mays authored the opinion. The issue was not whether the appeals court fully retried the case. It was about timing, when the legal clock started, which transcript mattered, and whether the petition was filed too late. Mackenzie's attorneys later asked the Ohio Supreme Court to review the post-conviction deadline dispute. Recent reporting says the Ohio Supreme Court had not yet decided whether it would hear that request. Her legal team continued to argue that medical evidence and defense counsel issues deserved review, while prosecutors remained confident in the conviction. As of the latest confirmed laxatus, Mackenzie Shirilla remains incarcerated. She is at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Her aggregate sentence is 15 years to life. Her first parole review is listed for 2037. Parole eligibility is not the same as release. It means the board can review the case. The final decision will depend on future proceedings, her institutional record, legal developments, and the views of those involved. So where does this case stand now? Mackenzie Shirilla remains convicted in the deaths of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Her family continues to dispute the conclusion that the crash was intentional. Her legal team has continued to challenge parts of the case, but the conviction remains in place, and the heart of the case remains the same. Dominic trusted Mackenzie because she was his girlfriend. Davion trusted the people he was with because they were familiar. A relationship that some people described as young love was later presented in court as troubled, escalating, and important to understanding motive. The car data, the witnesses, the route, and the courtroom testimony turned a crash into a murder conviction. This case is not only about speed, it is about how private conflict can become part of a public courtroom record. It is about how evidence can challenge the story people want to believe. And it is about two young men whose names should not be lost behind the debate over Mackenzie's image. Dominic Russo was more than Mackenzie's boyfriend. Davion Flanagan was more than the second passenger. They were the lives at the center of this case. Comment below with the part of the evidence you think mattered most: the relationship history, the vehicle data, or the courtroom testimony. And subscribe to Behind Unreal Love Crimes for more victim-centered true crime documentaries, where we follow the relationship, the evidence, and the verdict